Joined now by Eduardo Gamarra from Miami, a professor of politics and international relations at Florida International University. He has written extensively on the Latin American affairs and testified before the U.S. Congress. Welcome to our broadcast.
Pleased to be here.
Tell us about the impact the military drills and, on the flip side, the protests we've seen in earlier weeks are having on the rising tensions and the hostility in Venezuela.
Well, the most recent military training and all of these military exercises are really a very classic rally around the flag situation in response to the, I would say, ill-conceived declaration by President Trump about using military to remove President Maduro from office or to restore democracy, as they're calling it. So that on the one hand. But most importantly, this comes in the context of a regime in Venezuela that has been increasingly moving toward authoritarianism, concentrating power, violating its own constitution, staging a very, very fraudulent election of a constituent assembly, and essentially shutting out the opposition and also shutting down the possibility of elections, of open elections that might lead to a regime transition.
As you know, the White House has said regarding these new financial sanctions that the measures were carefully collaborated to deny Maduro a dictatorship, a critical source of financing to maintain what they see as his illegitimate rule. How is this affecting the people in the meantime?
Well, Venezuela is going through a severe economic crisis, which is really the product of the economic mismanagement that the Maduro and previously the Chavez regime had been conducting. And in fact, one of the most ludicrous things is that here you have one of the wealthiest countries on earth in terms of access to natural resources, and yet an incredibly poorly managed economy that has led to the current situation. So any kind of sanction that the U.S. imposes, and in this case, you know, the restricting of access to bonds and renegotiating its debt and so on, is going to exacerbate local domestic tensions, and it's going to make the government less able to come up with emergency measures to deal with their own financial situation.
U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley has said we'll not stand for the dictatorship he's trying to create. We're going to continue to take decisive action against him until he takes steps to return Venezuela to a prosperous democracy. But you know, what's actually going to work with him? What will penetrate to Maduro?
Well, that's a very good question, and especially in the context of sanctions. We know from the Cuban experience and from sanctions against other countries around the world that sanctions generally either do not work or take a very long time to have an impact. So it's quite possible that Maduro will continue with his plans to consolidate this regime, and the Constituent Assembly that they just unlawfully elected will change the Constitution and will close access to the opposition even further. It's also quite possible that you know, this appeal to nationalism will essentially consolidate even opposition groups against the possibility of further or more extreme military action. But I would say that overall, we can expect, you know, sanctions to have a gradual, very slow impact. But the Maduro regime is going to dig in, and I don't foresee any change in the short or midterm.
So, as you know, President Trump has been talking about possible military action. Whether he would make good on that threat or not, we don't know. But he's been also talking about banning imports of Venezuelan oil for months.
Right.
What kind of impact would that have?
Well, again, there's a lot of speculation about this. Will it have an impact on Venezuela? Yes, because it will essentially cut off its only source of income, because Venezuela, despite everything, is still producing and exporting oil. But at the same time, it may have an impact on the price of oil in the United States. And given the hurricane in the Gulf right now and affecting Texas, you know, it's quite possible that, you know, that maybe the sanctions against Venezuela are going to be put off.